In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, family, and welcome to the season premiere of Season 4, Episode 1 of America in Black and White. Welcome to a moment we've been building towards with intention, discipline, and purpose. Tonight is not just another episode. Tonight is the Season 4 premiere of America in Black and White, a platform where truth stands tall, where our stories breathe, and where our brilliance refuses to be dim. Every season has its heartbeat, but this one begins with a thunderclap, because tonight we open our new season with a man whose leadership has shifted classrooms, transformed districts, and elevated entire communities. A man who has spent more than 25 years proving that when you lead with courage, strategy, and compassion, you don't just change schools, you change lives. Dr. Jonathan A. Brown is a force, a builder, a strategist, a champion for equity who has turned vision into measurable victory. From Philadelphia's high schools to national consulting rooms, from higher education lecture halls to community spaces where hope is rebuilt, Dr. Brown has shown us what it means to lead with purpose and deliver results. And on this season premiere, we honor the journey, the discipline, and the legacy of a man who embodies the every spirit of transformation. So share this stream, call somebody, bring them into the room because season 4 starts right now and we're beginning with power. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jonathan Brown.
Mr. K, thank you for that warm introduction.
Well, thank you for being here and blessing us with your presence. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience before we get into the show?
Well, I'm just grateful to God for the opportunity to serve his purpose and to be here with you this evening and talk about this wonderful work that I've been able to be a part of over the last few decades.
Wow. Well, I tell you, I'm really happy that it's us that we have you here, and I definitely am ready to delve into this because I want the people to learn. First, I want them to learn a whole lot more about you, the person. So, can you tell us who was Jonathan Brown before the titles, the degrees, and the leadership role?
Before all of those things, I was a brother and a son and a child of God. And so I've been fortunate to be the youngest of three biological children. I have several foster brothers and sisters who are a little bit younger than me as well. That has helped shape my experience. And I've always tried to give honor to God and to bring pride to my family through my words, deeds, and actions. And
Wow.
so I'm not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination. I've had my share of challenges, but I've always sought to do what I've understood to be right.
Okay. So, what was your earliest memory of seeing education as a pathway rather than just a requirement?
I mean, as early as my own experience in kindergarten, I could begin to see clearly the differences between students who were academically inclined and those who struggled. And for those of us who were academically talented, there were opportunities provided to us that were not provided to our classmates that didn't take learning as seriously or didn't have the same backgrounds to come to school as ready. So in kindergarten, my own experiences, I saw that there were a wide variety of experiences available to me and others when we took advantage of education. As an adult, I saw the difference when I became a teacher for the first time in the South Bronx. And
Oh,
working in that community, there are a lot of young people that we encountered who didn't have many adults who cared about them or provided opportunities or experiences that I had the privilege to experience as a young person. And for those students who took advantage of the opportunities that were afforded to them, I saw that they really blossomed. And many of my former students from the South Bronx are real champions in their current lines of work. So that experience was definitely powerful to illustrate how academics and education can change lives.
So, what were some of the things that you could remember as early as kindergarten that your parents would say to you or instill in you before you got to school?
Before school, it was follow directions and get out the house. But in all seriousness, in our home, we were fortunate to have access to a wide variety of resources. So I'm a big time reader. And in our home, we had a World Book Encyclopedia. We had the Childcraft Encyclopedia for Children. We had as many National Geographics as you could want to put your hands on. And so those experiences of having access to those rich materials really helped broaden for me what learning could and should be. And so I came to school with a little bit of a different mentality because I wasn't looking to get filled in school. I was looking to take what I already knew and expand it beyond what I could possibly imagine.
Mm. Who poured into you as a child and helped shape your sense of purpose?
My sense of purpose is really defined by my parents. And so, my mother was a homemaker. My father was a higher education administrator and is currently a pastor in his 51st year of service. And they made very clear to me what they expected of me, which was to give my very best, to do the different, to do right when given the opportunity, and to put my best effort into anything in which I attempted.
Mm. So, what challenges did you face growing up that later informed your leadership style?
Wow, what challenges didn't I have? I stand here today. I'm 6'5" and 240 pounds, right? So when
Okay.
people see me, they think I'm a linebacker or have had some experience in professional sports. But as a young person, being a timid person, a person who turned the other cheek and looked to walk the second mile with people, I dealt with bullies in school. As early as third grade, there were people who would make fun of me for the way that I spoke, the effort that I put into my classwork, and just the overall success I was experiencing in school. Furthermore, there were teachers who weren't always available to meet my needs as well. And so, coming to school with the rich background that my parents were able to afford me, sometimes school just wasn't it. There wasn't much to extend my learning, there wasn't much to engage me. And those were real challenges that permeated throughout my academic career as a young person.
Wow. So in just thinking about that, and you're one of those kids that was doing your work. You took pride in that because it was instilled in you.
Yes.
When you had these folk that were trying to criticize you to break that, what was the resilience that poured through you that was not going to let that stop
I had a very clear vision of what success is. And, growing up in Plainfield, New Jersey, it's an urban community with a very rich history. And I had an opportunity to see what success is and what it was not. And because I was clear that success was supposed to be part of my destiny, I was very aware of what would happen if I made decisions that weren't in line with the expectations that others have had of me, my family in particular. And so when those opportunities to do wrong were presented, or when people made fun of me for doing the right thing, honestly, it didn't bother me too much.
you?
While you wish that everybody would love and like you for who you are, I understand that that kind of friction's part of the process of making progress. And
Right.
so, while I wish I could tell you that everybody loved me and encouraged me, that wasn't the case, and didn't really affect me in too many ways, other than to just be aware of what others' experiences are. And I got to really understand why some people were haters, for lack of a better term, or didn't see success in the same way in which I did, and why they might serve as obstacles to that. So I did a lot of learning from those experiences as well.
So, with that experience and with your students, I mean, have there ever been any students that's in your class that you've come across that's faced some similar situations that you maybe had to give them a pep talk and help them to get through stuff like that?
Absolutely. I mean, and students of all different varieties and backgrounds. And one of the areas in which I experienced real success as an instructor in the classroom was with students with disabilities. And for students who learn differently, the way in which my classroom was operated was really designed to be inclusive and multifaceted in the ways in which we ask students to demonstrate their understanding and learn new information. So a lot of students who may not have experienced success in school were able to flourish in my classroom because of the design of instruction, but also too my own sensitivities to the fact that success doesn't look one way. And many times as teachers, we're aware of how we became successful in school, and we seek to replicate that path for others. However, while I was a person who did experience success in school, I didn't love school, and was considered an underachiever all the way through until I got to my master's program, believe it or not. So I
Oh,
was able to reflect on some of my own experiences and why I was perceived as an underachiever or shortcoming, and apply that to the young people in which I worked with to help them flourish.
oh man. I mean that my hands my I have to go out to you, I have to give you an applause for that because I know that there are several students, especially that come from underserved, marginalized communities,
Yes.
that sometimes have a lot of conflict, especially within when it comes to situations like that. And some of these kids could be just as smart as I don't know what, but when kids are actually making fun of them, then it's kind of like it takes away from who they are, and they pretty much get this thing. Well, I need to do this to be like these people.
That is the path that some people take, and I was having a conversation with a good brother of mine the other day about sort of how we looked at media and how media sends certain messages about who we're supposed to be. And we were actually talking about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And as popular as that show is, and as much as I love Will Smith, the representation of Will Smith was not one that I identified with as a young person. I identified more with Carlton.
Mhm.
And part of the reason why is that I saw the success he was having in school, and he sort of matched a persona that I thought was more in line with who I was, whereas I saw the Will character as more of a disruptive presence in the school setting and even in his home. And so, we can look at images and determine who we're supposed to be in either direction. We don't have to go down the easy path of saying the media presents me this way, therefore I am. We're blessed with discernment, and we can make better decisions than just following a path that's set by others.
Um, was there a defining moment when you realized you were called to lead?
Yes, it was in high school. And when I was in high school and I was thinking about what I wanted my future to be, I knew that I wanted to participate in higher education, but I didn't necessarily know into what field and how to go about doing that. And one of the things I've noticed about myself, Charles, is I've never actively pursued leadership. I've always been prepared for it when opportunities have presented itself. And
Mhm.
so when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to run for senior class president and did so. And I was grateful for the opportunity to win that election and sort of raise the voice of my classmates and how we were experiencing school. And that
Mhm.
was the first time I realized that I could take some of the talents I was blessed with and put them into service for others.
Oh wow! So at that time, and when you decided you were going to run for that office, um, did you have any doubts or in times of how to actually do that, or did you just think you just take the bull by the horn and just go with it?
It would be dishonest for me to tell you that you go into leadership knowing exactly what to do. And what I have found is that people who think they know what they're supposed to do are often apt to fail. And in every leadership position I've gone into, I've gone in with the position as a learner. What is expected of me? How do you actually go about making these changes and making a difference that you expect to make? And sometimes you get that information early on in your tenure, and other times that information comes a little bit later, and you have to figure out how to make adjustments to lead successfully.
So, how did your family influence your values around service and community?
In 1996, by the Courier News in New Jersey, which was the major newspaper in that area at the time, my mother was named Volunteer of the Year for the state of New Jersey.
Oh wow!
And my mother was a homemaker, but I'm going to get a little bit emotional. She is such a caregiver to others. And, there were so many people as members of the church and in the community who were facing homelessness, who were facing addiction and facing other challenges. And my mother always had a bag of clothes, some extra food, or some resources to help navigate the social services system so that they could be housed or receive medical care. In addition to that, my father being a pastor and being the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Cranford, New Jersey, has really modeled the way as to what service can look like as well. So the way in which my mother did it looks different than the way in which my father did it, but they both modeled for me what it means to put others before yourself and how to go about doing that with a loving and open heart.
What role did faith, discipline, or mentorship play in your development?
Ooh, all three have played a role. So you'll have to remind me of some of them as I come back to them. But the idea of faith is interesting because in our spiritual journeys, we often have more faith or less faith at different times of our pathway. And in the absence of strong faith, there's always been hope that the faith would return and build there. Charles, in a number of different professional experiences I've had some pretty big jobs to complete, from restructuring schools to helping lift school districts out of negative accountability. And, there are many others who have gone before me and attempted those things and weren't successful. So I've never gone into it thinking I can do this. I've always into it thinking it can be done. And so I knew that by building the capacity of the others around me, by articulating a really clear vision and relying on my faith that we would carry through. As far as mentorship, I have been privileged to have had many people serve as my mentor and for me to serve as a mentor to others. And what I encourage all leaders to do is maintain a coach if you don't have a mentor and make sure that you're mentoring or coaching others. And in my role as a school principal, I've had the privilege of mentoring over 2 dozen younger school administrators who have all gone on to great things in work. Either they're now school principals, assistant superintendents, professors, and directors or chairpersons as well. And so I have found that by mentoring others that you get poured back into as well. And you get to hold a mirror to yourself about your leadership and how you're making the differences that you expect to make. So faith and mentorship have played key roles in my own leadership pathway.
And so, how about the discipline?
The discipline piece is tricky. And, I probably skipped over that on purpose because I'm not always as disciplined as I would want to be, Charles. We think about when you see people who experience success, it can sometimes look a lot easier than it actually is to accomplish. And I've had folks say to me, well, you've made that look easy. I'm like, well, thanks, because it absolutely wasn't. And so I wish I could tell you that I had a strict schedule that I stuck to every day and that nothing got in the way of that. But the discipline that I've sort of applied to my own leadership is discipline in the mission.
Mhm.
And I think that so often as leaders, when you are entrusted with power and authority, it can go to your head pretty quickly. And you can begin to take advantage of some of the leeway that you're given when you're in charge. And I think that those who have worked with me, those who have had favorable opinions and negative, would both say the same things. I'm a person of integrity. And so bringing that into the work and making sure that I do what I say I'm going to do,
Mhm.
that the practices that we say that we're going to practice are well developed and enhanced through a lot of conversation and through professional learning. And so my discipline comes through the sense of doing what I say I'm going to do, sticking to the mission, and making sure that my values come first in any work that I do.
Mhm. What is one lesson from your childhood that still guides you today?
Ooh. I think that one of the lessons I had as a child, and I mentioned before that I grew up in a home with foster siblings. And so I had a number of brothers and sisters who came into the house with different circumstances, and it taught me not to take much for granted. And while I had loving parents who took care of me and kept me, I had several foster brothers and sisters who didn't have those basic things or did not have the experiences that I had. So I never took for granted the opportunity to go on trips with my family, the opportunity to go on vacation, the opportunity to read the books that were available to me, the opportunity to be in a loving home. And so I developed a strong sense of empathy and gratitude as a young person, and that has stayed with me throughout my life.
Oh, wow. How did your own schooling experiences shape your beliefs about equity?
What's interesting about that, I mentioned before that I was not a great student as a young person.
Mhm.
And part of the reason I know now why I struggled in school, which is I was recently diagnosed with ADHD and believed to potentially be on the spectrum. And when that information was brought to me, it clarified for me so many of the struggles that I experienced as a young person. And not having necessarily someone know that those things were challenges for me really helped me begin to understand that there are multiple ways in which success presents itself in school.
Mhm.
And so having that information in my head has helped guide the way in which I lead and how I talk to folks about the pathways that they're on.
Mhm. So, what does taking care of the people who take care of our kids mean to you personally?
That's everything. And I mentioned before, Charles, that when you get into a leadership position, sometimes that power, that authority, it can go to your head. And
Mhm.
there are leaders who forget that there are other professionals who have skills that may be equal or greater than theirs, and that they are also coming to work with a with a purpose to make a difference in the lives of children. Because of that, I've made it a priority to understand that I can't be in every classroom when you're a school principal and deliver instruction.
Right.
You can't sweep every hallway, you can't serve the lunch. You can see those things throughout the course of the day, but you can't do all of those things. And recognizing that it takes a team and a village to raise healthy and strong children and to appropriately educate them, it led me to understand that no one can carry out the mission if they're not well taken care of in the workplace. And as a leader, that led me to develop a leadership framework called WIRE. And that's the wire stands for wellness, intentionality, respect, and empowerment. And those four domains have guided my leadership in terms of how I support others in meeting their own missions with, and going about doing the work. So,
Mhm,
for example, part of my background is I'm trained in trauma informed practices and coaching.
mhm,
And having that background, every meeting I go into, it starts with one question: how are you feeling today? You'd be surprised how regularly people report that no one ever asks them how they're feeling and actually listens for the answer.
mhm.
And when you lead by first caring about the people, then understand that I care because I care about them, that it's okay to care about the mission and recognize that in this work, we're all human beings. I've made mistakes, Charles, several, right? And the way that you learn and benefit from those mistakes is when someone takes you under their wing and says, look, that wasn't the right decision. Let's talk about that and put a plan in place to ensure it doesn't happen again. And that for me is how I've gone about leading the adults that I've been charged with supervising and managing and leading, is making sure that I'm aware of what their needs, wants, wishes, and dreams are, and accounting for that and how I go about leading them. And that means not handling everyone the same way and not treating every situation the same way, but recognizing that when you meet the needs of the adults will in turn meet the needs of the children.
So as you think about how you grew up from a kid going through school from the beginning, coming up to the point of where you are now, what are some things that you could tell or you could say to young people, especially those that are listening right now, as to some things that they should or should not do, and how to go about their everyday lives, to make sure that they stay on the right path?
The one thing I would tell all young people is be aware of who you are. When you're young and you have dreams and hopes and aspirations, that's the spirit talking to you about who you are and what your purpose is supposed to be. And what I have found is I knew pretty early on that being a leader was going to be an important part of my journey, that having integrity, that being a learner was going to be important. And so I prioritized those things in my life when distractions presented themselves. What I would tell young people is that little voice in your head that dreams, those dreams that keep you up and sometimes in the middle of the night, listen to it and pursue those dreams. And when that doubt creeps in, understand that that's normal and natural, but it's not necessarily a meaningful conversation in that your brain is telling you that should make you quit or stop doing the work. It's sometimes when things get really good for you, it gets hard as well. And that's not the time to give up. That's the time to reinforce your purpose and your why. The other thing I would tell young people is nothing's going to go the way you expect it to, and that's okay. As long as you keep your eye on what your vision is and expect that there will be ups and downs, backs and forths, up disappointments and points of jubilation, but it's not going to go the way you expect. And just because it doesn't go the way that you're expecting it to go does not mean that you're not on the right path. It doesn't mean that you're not going to accomplish your goal. So just be mindful of those practices that you have to employ to be successful in life. You have to have a clear vision, you have to have strong values, and you have to have resilience to accomplish the goals that you set for yourself.
That's a very beautiful message I think that young people should take. And I appreciate that because, as we think about in today's time and, where a lot of us have come from to where we are now, and just thinking about these younger adults or younger kids today, I think that message that you just gave was one that more than resonates, but it's something that a lot of them need to hear, and they need to hear it constantly.
Yes.
Because, if they don't hear it constantly, then it's just like, oh, well, I guess I'm doing nothing right and nobody cares and so forth, and they just go lollygag. But that message was really clear, and I really appreciate you for saying that. Let's talk about your career in education. What drew you to the field of education more than 25 years ago?
Natural inclination to do the work. And so, when I was a resident assistant in college, I had bulletin boards in the hallway with words of the week and geography to help people understand the world a little bit differently. When I was in high school, I had an opportunity to serve in a peer leadership program where we provided learning to one another and at a local elementary school. And it was very natural for me to engage people in the process of where are you, would you like to go, and how can we work together to get you there. It also helps when you have two sisters who are educators as well. So, it was very common in our house to line up the stuffed animals and the cabbage patches and get our books out and play school. And, I look back on some of those experiences and they were actually important to learning how to go about becoming a teacher. So, it was always a part of my background, the idea of delivering instruction and helping others grow academically. And I just sort of took to it like a fish to water. But I did not expect to become an educator at all. As a matter of fact, when I moved to New York more than 25 years ago, I ended up at an interview by chance. My ex wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, had encouraged me to go to a job interview for educators. And I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. And you know how it is between boyfriend and girlfriend. She got me to get there. And when I walked in, I was grabbed immediately because of my resume and introduced to the principal who became my first principal, Stephen Rappaport. And that was the beginning. I loved my first 4 years of my educational career. For those of you who don't know, teaching children in New York City, teaching children in places like Philadelphia, there's nothing like it. Children everywhere need high quality educators, but there's something special about children in our largest cities that really bring a lot of joy to this work, partially because of the challenges that come with helping them experience success, but also the appreciation those students demonstrate when you help them achieve their goals.
Oh, wow. Um, what was your first year in the classroom like?
Hard, very hard. When I first started teaching, I was a creative writing teacher in a grades 5 through 8 middle school in the Bronx. And I had at that time more than 350 different students. I did not have any experience as a student teacher, nor had I taken any classes to prepare me for teaching. And I was just put into this position with, you ready to teach? Go. And I had 13 different classes. There were some classes I saw 5 days a week, other classes I saw one day a week, some classes with native English speakers, and other classes where no one spoke English at all. And just getting the students to sit down and be ready to learn was a challenge when you're not prepared to do that. So there were lots of tears, lots of early nights in my first couple of months teaching, trying to figure out how to engage the students in meaningful and productive learning. But I want to tell you that, you asked me about mentorship before. I had a mentor to me, and that was one of the great things that the New York City Department of Education did at that time for me and for other new teachers, was provide us with mentors during our first year. And every other Tuesday, my mentor would come and we would have coffee and terrible lunch in the cafeteria. And he would talk to me about what my practices were, where I was trying to go, and what were some of the best ways to get there. And some of those conversations that Richard Jackal and I had are some of the best memories of my life, as he looked to shape me and help me hone the natural talent that I had going into the classroom. And so that first year started off very difficult and very challenging. But by the end of my first year, I had a great grasp on what it took to succeed as a teacher.
Oh, man. How did you transition from teacher to district level leader?
So there was several steps in between going from the classroom to district level leadership. And I never expected to become a principal, nevertheless, a deputy superintendent or an assistant superintendent. I really enjoy being in the classroom. With education, the thrill comes from with producing learning through the intelligent design of instructional experiences. But what I saw was that there was a need. And what I found is that many of the leaders who supported me often talked about how there were a lack of high quality leaders at their level who were vision and mission driven. And so after being a classroom teacher for 8 years, I became a social studies chairperson at Spring Valley High School in East Ramapo. And that was a great introduction into formal school leadership because I did teach part of the day while administrating in the other half. And then from there, I became an assistant principal, a principal twice, and then a deputy superintendent. And what led me to the deputy superintendent role was the tremendous success we had at the two schools that I served as a principal. In one of the schools, we were under investigation by the Office of Civil Rights because of the disparate outcomes for students of color versus white students in that school district. The students of color were suspended more and were less likely to be present in the advanced academic classes. And so at that time, I was tasked with other members of the team of redesigning a middle school so that the experience for the students would prevent them from being suspended disproportionately and from not accessing higher level learning. That sort of strategic planning that we engaged in across 2 years really tapped into all the skills I've learned in both formal and informal settings. And it brought a great sense of pride to me, knowing that with thoughtful design and real collaboration, you can really transform schools. And so going from my first school to my second school and applying that understanding and experiencing similar success, it led me to realize that this is something that could be done at a district level. So in my second principalship, it was a school, Charles, where there were 600 students present. And prior to my first year, there were 400 documented suspensions,
Wow.
right? And so I said documented because there were other suspensions that weren't documented. The school had demonstrated a minimal proficiency for students. We were in the single digits, and we had a growth score from New York State of 0 out of 20. By year number 4, we went from 400 suspensions to 11, and we increased our growth score from 0 to 16 out of 20. We improved attendance for teachers, attendance for students, and more importantly, we empowered young people to take on leadership roles in the educational setting as well. And that led me to aspire to help districts acquire those same sorts of systems and practices so that more students could benefit. And then I had the privilege of becoming a deputy superintendent of a 7,000 student school district in 2018, and we were able to replicate that work there as well.
Can you tell us how prevalent or did the prison to pipeline system also play a part in that?
The school to prison pipeline is real.
Mhm.
And every school principal has played a role in helping that pipeline operate, whether
Mm.
we've wanted to or not. Okay.
Mhm.
It's one of the big disappointments early in my career before I developed more skills and more tool sets and more tools and more resources. Suspensions, unfortunately, were necessary. And you see very clearly what happens to a young person when they get suspended from school once. They often feel discarded. They never come back to school and perform better academically. And you often lose whatever trust you had with those young people in order to get them to do what you were expecting them to do. And
Mm.
so, unfortunately, I have had students who have ended up in the justice system. And those were students who, in my opinion, did not get what they needed from school. I'll also tell you that, schools bear the brunt of the responsibility for the outcomes for young people, but it's not schools alone that determine those outcomes. We
Mm.
have to begin to have broader conversations about what's happening in our young people's homes, their communities, their religious institutions, and everywhere else that they spend time, part of their day.
Mm. So, in said situations like that, what are some of the things that you implemented or changed to help this process and help the students?
First and foremost, I developed relationships with students. And so when I became a principal in Mount Vernon and New York, if you don't know anything about Mount Vernon, money earned in Mount Vernon, home of Heavy D and Denzel Washington, it was a school community where there are a number of different challenges because of a lack of consistent leadership. When I took over Longfellow Middle School, which eventually became Benjamin Turner Middle School, Charles, I was the 10th principal in 14 years.
Mm.
And I was the fourth in 5 years.
Oh,
That
wow.
lack of consistency showed in the way in which students conducted themselves in school because the expectations constantly changed for the adults and the young people. And so when I got there, I was like, well, of course, the young people aren't following the rules. What are they? Where is the consistency? Where are the relationships with the young people that help them understand what they're being asked to do and then actually follow through on those things? So, first and foremost, I developed relationships with the young people to better understand who they are and so that they could understand why I expect the things from them that I expect from them. The
Mm.
second thing is that you need alternatives to traditional disciplinary consequences. And that requires developing a truly collaborative and creative school community because there are some people who are just like, suspend them, send them home. I don't want them here, without
Mhm.
thinking about the consequence of that, both for the student and for them going on the long term. And so, one of the practices that I was able to develop as a principal was something called the Good Standing Program. And the Good Standing Program clearly articulated for students what we expected from them behaviorally and academically. And every 5 weeks, students would find out whether they were on the good standing list or not. Now, the good standing list was made up of students who were making an effort to meet the expectations. So we recognize that all students aren't ready academically, but the question is, are you making the effort? And so to encourage our young people, if they attended extra help but still weren't experiencing success in class, they were considered to be in good standing because they were making the effort. I can't tell you, Charles, what a difference that made, not just in the success of our school, but in the lives of those individual students. Our school was open 30 Saturdays a year from 9 to 12, and we regularly had 50 to 100 students attend school on Saturday. We were open during vacations as well, where we engaged young people in learning and some extracurricular activities, and we would have anywhere from 25 to 33% of the school attend that. We developed a real culture where students understood that it wasn't about being evaluated. It was really about where are you today and how can you grow as a person overall. And now I recognize from my own journey, you can be great at something today, but when you get to the next level, it can be hard and you may not experience that same success. So we wanted to make sure our young people knew that there were multiple ways to demonstrate success and that the adults here have your back. So the good standing program was part of it. Another part of it too was implementing some restorative practices. And we had something called a safety plan for our young people. where during their advisories, we would engage them in conversations to have them think about what triggers them. What does it look like when they're triggered? And how do they de escalate when they're triggered? Our young people, once they figured out how to de escalate themselves, they would write 2 or 3 ways to de escalate, put it on a sticker that went on their ID card, and then they would execute that safety plan in the event that they weren't able to conduct themselves the way that we expected them to. You'd be surprised how well that practice worked in our school, because instead of a young person engaging in a conflict with a peer or an adult, they would flash their safety plan to a security officer or to the teacher and then execute it. That plan could be something as simple as go get a drink of water, or it could have been like go to Dr. Brown's office and feed the fish. But whatever it was, there was always something that we would do for young people to help them de-escalate, because we wanted them to know adults get angry too, but there are ways in which we handle that. Adults get disappointed too, but there are ways in which we should handle that. So implementing those trauma-informed practices, creating alternatives like the Good Standing program really made strong differences in helping young people engage in school appropriately.
So, what leadership qualities do you believe are the most essential in today's educational landscapes?
The ability to listen. I'm going to start with that. Too often in education, people want to tell other people what to do without understanding where the person's coming from that's being tasked with what to do. I have found that being a good listener has set me apart from some of my colleagues in terms of how we go about doing our work. And I have also found that where I have struggled with supervisors is that they don't listen. They're very quick to tell you what their opinion is. They're very quick to share what conclusions they've come to, but their inability to listen really prevents them from actually leading. Because if you're not, people aren't behind you, if they're not following you and you're a leader, you're just going for a walk. And
Yeah.
many leaders I've come across, because they're not listening to the people that they're tasked with leading, they're just taking a walk and nobody's actually following them on where they're going. So I would say that first and foremost, being a leader is the most important skill. Being a listener is the most important skill with leadership. And then I would say secondarily, demonstrating patience is a secondary skill, is a second skill that good leaders understand. One of the things I've always brought to the table is if my idea is really a good idea, then other people will agree with it. I won't have to beat them over the head. I won't have to coerce them. I should be able to show them why this is a good idea. And sometimes that takes the patience of building the collaborative environment that actually allows those conversations to take place. Developing buy-in has been a key factor of my leadership, and it really comes from listening to folks and demonstrating patience before making decisions or coming to conclusions.
So, what does transformational leadership look like in practice?
Transformational leadership looks like in practice individual consideration first and foremost. You've heard me talk about meeting people where they are. That is the first thing that you have to do with transformational leadership, because anytime you're asking an individual to change or you're asking a system to change, there's a grieving process that's going to occur.
Mhm.
All change is loss. All loss will be grieved. Now, some grieving lasts 30 seconds and folks are over it. Some grief can take a long period of time. But understanding that what you're asking people to do is more than just practical, it can be emotional or spiritual for some folks, is a key component to going about being a really authentic transformational leader. Everyone wants to call themselves a transformational leader, but I haven't come across too many who actually are. And what I mean by that is, can you actually show me or show others how you've helped change an organization for the better? I've seen lots of leaders who have been pseudo transformational leaders. They have changed organizations, but not for the better. Very few are actually able to come in and move an organization closer to its mission. And so we have to be thoughtful about using that term transformational leader. But the way it shows up first is individual consideration. Do you care about the people you're leading? And that's very easy to pick up on.
Doesn't that make that sound like something that's trendy? Because when you think about it in that manner, because the way you just explained that, a lot of people do say, "Oh, I'm a transformational leader." Now, I mean, I know that there's a lot that goes into that. So, I mean, I don't criticize, but I just kind of like think, well, I'm not sure about that.
Right.
But when we think about trends, that sounds like a trend because people are bestowing titles on themselves that they really don't earn.
They not only have they not earned it, I'm going to go a step further and say I'm not sure everyone fully knows what transformational leadership is, because it's not a place that you live in. When you're a leader, you have to have diverse skill sets. There are times where you must be transactional. Not everything is flowery or going to be pretty or has to be collaborative. Sometimes you have to be transactional. There are times that you have to be laissez-faire. There are times that you have to use collaborative leadership. There are times you have to use servant leadership. And the thing, Charles, I would tell you is I don't call myself a transformational leader. I've led transformations.
Right.
I'm still growing as a leader and still diversifying my skill set so that I can apply whatever skills are necessary for whatever situation I'm facing. But transformational leadership, yeah, it is trendy for folks to call themselves that. But I hope that for those who are listening to this conversation, that they'll start to move away from giving themselves label and let the outcomes create the labels for them. The outcomes that I've been able to help produce for schools, for districts, and for young people, they speak for themselves. And so folks can call me whatever they want based off of those outcomes. But to call yourself a transformational leader usually indicates that you're not.
Mm. How do you build trust with educators and school communities?
I think trust first and foremost begins with being honest. And in my interactions with folks, I serve as a coach currently, and I get to meet strangers all the time. And within a very short period of time, I have to engage them in a trusting relationship so that they can open up and get the coaching that they need to flourish in their role. I have found that developing trust with those that you directly supervise or those that you support isn't different. Trust begins with letting people know who you are. And if you have non-negotiables, saying that right up front. I have a couple of non-negotiables in my leadership. And I'm not, for example, as a leader, I'm not one of those people that you can ask for forgiveness if you fail to ask for permission.
Right.
So I let people know that right up front, like, hey, I'm not one of those people where you want to do that with. And
Right.
sometimes people don't know how to take that. But what they learn eventually is that, hey, he's being open and honest and transparent. And therefore, I can communicate with him.
Mm.
The other thing, too, is as a leader, I've never positioned myself as if I'm better than anyone. And because of that, when you have people who report to you, I work to respect their perspectives, even when their perspective is in contradiction to my own. And so I've let those who I've worked with know that, hey, you can disagree with me. It's about how you disagree with me that will help us develop strong relationships. And so folks love hearing that they can yell at me because I can be yelled at. It's okay. But it needs to be behind closed doors and it needs to be done with the intent of resolving a situation and not just yelling or fussing for the sake of that. And so I have found that by being really open and honest with folks, by being truthful in my interactions with them. And when I wanted to also just mention being truthful doesn't mean being rude, right? There's being truthful requires some tact as well. And not every truth needs to be shared, and not every truth should drive every decision that you're making. But by being truthful and open with folks, by being a good listener, by actually showing people, I care what you think, because I actually care what other people think. I go into every situation believing that there's something for me to learn, even in potentially contentious situations. So I think that developing trust for me has been relatively easy because of the trust that I demonstrate by being truthful and bringing integrity to the forefront.
What is the biggest misconception people have about school leadership?
People really don't understand what the principal's job is. Principals are responsible for every single thing that happens in, on, and around the school campus, even things that have nothing to do with education. For example, if there's a power outage in the neighborhood, that affects what the principal's day looks like. If there is a sick staff member, that affects what the principal's day looks like because they have to generate coverage for those programs. Principals are tasked with having hundreds, if not thousands, of interactions each and every day, and it is very difficult to transition from one topic to the next. I think too many people, those who supervise school principals and those who work for them or are members of school communities, don't show school principals nearly enough respect for the diversity of skills that their job requires. Being a school principal, you come every day with a sense of understanding about what you want to accomplish, and there are exigencies that will present themselves that prevent you from accomplishing that. And folks don't often take that into consideration when they're interacting with the principal. Too many people see principals as gatekeepers, either the person who can give them something or who won't give them something. But honestly, school principals are middle managers. They have bosses that they report to as well. There are policies and laws that affect the decision making of school principals that most folks never even heard of or even knew were factors in principals' decision making. So, for those who are out there who are aware of school communities, I think that you have to broaden your perspective of what school principals are being asked to do each and every day. Every year, the job gets more difficult and more complex, and there has to be a greater respect for the complexities of their daily jobs.
So, what accomplishments in your career means the most to you?
Ooh, I think the leaders that I've mentored, watching them become leaders who mentor, leaders who transform organization, leaders who take care of the people that take care of their kids, has been the greatest joy of my career. And I think about like Doris DePauw, the principal of Portchester Middle School, or Noel Campbell, the assistant superintendent for human resources in Nyack, New York. And I remember where they were when I first met them, and being able to grow them throughout their careers and watch them flourish and now grow other leaders, for me, has been the single greatest joy of being a leader in the school setting. I'm very proud of them.
Oh, wow.
And it's not
Um,
just, I mentioned those two by name, Charles, but there are several others as well. I probably should have used names 'cause I left out probably a dozen folks, but there was just so many leaders that I've had the chance to just watch them come into education who are now assistant superintendents doing really solid jobs.
and as you think about this, tell me, what is it what's your motivation as you get more and more into the education system? Because I know 25 years is a long time, but in that whole process, where you're mentoring, you're developing, you're instructing, you're just doing everything to actually lead by the example. What's your motivation?
It's how God made me. I like to help people. And, I've been tasked with helping people in educational settings, but that's not the only place in my life in which I provide assistance to others. So, whether it be helping someone cross the street or helping someone complete a doctoral program, I'm just wired to help. It's how God made me. It's what brings me a sense of purpose and a sense of joy each and every day, whether it be in a professional or a personal setting. I just really like to help people and see them reach their potential. In part because I know how much it's meant to me to be helped, but I've also known what it's like to not be helped when I felt like I needed it or wanted it. And much of the way in which I lead is in part because that's not how I've been led. And
Wow.
so, it is really challenging in an environment to maintain your positive demeanor as a leader when the people above you use swear words to engage you, where they make threats, where politics drive their decision making. But I would tell you that seeing leaders like that has only further increased my resolve to be positive and to help others.
Mm. How do you approach improving school climate in challenging environments?
Challenging environments are challenging because they're designed to be. We have enough information about what adults need, about what young people need, where we should be able to create environments that go about meeting their needs. And so, first and foremost, it begins with having conversations with the members of the school community to understand what their experience has been and what the expectations are for conduct in our climate. I have found that when teachers feel well supported by the presence of clear expectations, by administrators who show up when they're asked to, by having systems in place, that those teachers will then feel more confident to go about developing the culture in the classroom that leads to a strong climate throughout the school. Additionally, it takes the presence of strong systems as well, and not just positive intentions. And that takes time to develop. But by reviewing your data, by looking at where your disruptive incidents occur, by finding out where your positive incidents occur, you can begin to think about putting things in place to prevent those issues from interfering with the climate of your school setting. So, my background's largely in middle school. Recess can make or break your experience as a middle school leader. And so, putting things in place during recess that we know are developmentally appropriate for young people keeps them out of trouble and allows them to come back from cafeteria and go back into the classroom without some of those disruptions and distractions that could prevent them from learning. So, just having a clear sense about your hot spots, your wishes, and your wants, and empowering others to go about creating that culture will lead to a positive climate in the school setting.
We have a comment here in the chat. Let me put it on the screen for you. It is from Lillian Diaz Lumbelli, and says, "And a servant leader." Do you want to respond to this comment?
Yes, when you do this work, you mentioned earlier about the labels that people put on themselves.
Hmm.
And servant leadership is one of those labels that gives me goosebumps because I do aim to serve in the way in which I lead.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, I ask people, what is it that you need? And I will start challenging conversations with, what are you looking for as an outcome here? And can I or can I not meet that? And so there are facets of servant leadership that definitely show up in my work in the way in which I go about finding out what people need and delivering it to them. So servant leadership is definitely in my toolkit, But I'll tell you, there's not one style that I would say I predominantly use in my approach to leading.
What does equity mean to you beyond the buzzwords?
For me, I'm sorry, Charles, I lost you there just for 1 second.
Okay, yeah, it's like you froze. So what does equity mean to you beyond buzzwords?
To me, equity unfortunately has taken on sort of a negative connotation based off of some political changes over the last decade, but I'll try to focus on the positive meanings of equity. And equity is really about, are you mission driven or not? When you are a school leader, the mission in school districts doesn't say, for the children who come to school ready, I will accomplish these things. Or for the students that I like, I will make sure that we provide these experiences. Every mission statement says all. And all means that you understand that everyone does not come to school with the same set of experiences, skills, or perspectives. And it is a responsibility of the school. We do not make cogs in school. Schools are like gardens. We grow cucumbers, we grow tomatoes, we grow spinach, right? And if you've ever had a garden before, every cucumber comes out a little bit different. Every tomato comes out a little bit different, but there's still tomatoes, there's still cucumbers. And part of what we're supposed to do in school is not guarantee universal outcomes for young people, other than every student should grow and work towards their full potential by the time they leave a public school setting.
Let's transition over to your work in the community outreach that you do and the impact. Can you tell us why is community engagement essential to school success?
Children are in school for maybe 6 or 7 hours a day. For the other 17 hours a day, either they're at home or they're somewhere in their community. Communities will help shape the experience that the young people have both after school and during school, but they can also shape the experience that young people have during the course of the school day. So it has always been one of my objectives to reach out to local businesses, to local nonprofits, and let them know what's happening in our school setting so that if they have ways that they can provide support, they can. One of my favorite experiences with community outreach was when I was a principal in Mount Vernon. I got a chance to work with hip hop legend Melly Mel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so he has led to the vision that he and I talked about at that time was creating a school with an authentic hip hop curriculum. And
Mhm.
out of that partnership, my young people were able to go to 106 in Park at BET. They were able to make music in school. They were able to see what the behind the scenes world of hip hop was like, and that there are other people there besides the performer. That sort of community outreach had really led to outstanding outcomes for my young people who participated in that program, but it also led to raising morale in the school community, in the school as well. I just use that one example, but when you have your local businesses and your local community members participating in the life of the school, it raises morale not just for the young people, but for the adults as well, because you feel like you're doing it together.
Mhm.
And one of the best examples I can think of in terms of reaching out to the broader community is when I was a principal in Mount Vernon, after school violence was an issue. And
Mhm.
we created a community town hall and we brought together people from city council, people from local nonprofits, people in the neighborhood who were concerned. And by bringing those people together, Charles, one of the things that we learned was that everyone saw the problem differently and no one had an accurate perception of what the actual problem was who was out in the community. But
Wow.
because they had come to us and were willing to have conversations about the needs of our community, not just the complaints about the community, we were able to develop a plan that led to a drastic reduction to the point where we had zero violent incidents across a 2 year period. So when you reach out to your school community, you can solve problems that you can't solve on your own, but you can also get investment in the young people that you can't produce by yourself either.
So, can you tell us in doing this community outreach, what's the impact of reaching the parents, or do you have a lot of interaction with the parents of these students?
Absolutely. So one of the things I was able to help facilitate as a principal was Saturday Academy for our parents, which was called Parent University.
Mhm.
And by bringing those parents in, we were able to not just expose them to the curriculum that the young people were learning, but also just to learn some of the philosophy that we employed about educating our young people. So by bringing those parents in, they got to see firsthand what a safety plan was and how you would go about developing it. They were able to see where our students were performing on state assessments and why that wasn't good enough and what were some things that we were aiming to do to help students improve their performance in those areas. So when you bring in your school community, you're no longer talking in hypotheticals, but you're talking in real concrete ways that people can see and feel in some cases to help them understand how they can contribute. And as a result, at the very least, not every parent is able to be fully engaged due to the circumstances of their lives. But by engaging parents in the ways in which we have, it does increase engagement, and at the very least, it decreases disruptive parents when they
Mhm.
understand what you're doing and why you're trying to do it.
Mm. What have communities taught you that textbooks never could?
The soul and spirit that people bring into any space is something that can't authentically be conveyed in literature. When every community has its own beat, its own vibe, its own culture, its own way of doing things. And if you don't come into a community open enough to find out what those experiences are, you end up not becoming a part of that community at all, and you probably won't be there very long. I have learned from communities there's lots of different ways to just live life, right? Like I've made decisions for myself and my family because they made sense to me. They're the ways in which I knew how to do it. But going into these different communities in which I've had the chance to work, I've learned there's lots of ways to be a parent. There's lots of ways to be a student. There's lots of ways to engage in school successfully. So I've learned there's lots of ways to love. There's lots of ways to succeed. There's lots of ways to be a community other than the way we think in our own heads.
How do you build authentic relationships with families?
So with families, developing authentic relationships requires being proactive. Unfortunately, many times in school settings, we wait to reach out to families when something's wrong.
Mhm.
The student has violated the code of conduct or they're struggling in school. That is one of the worst ways to go about developing authentic relationships with families. And so one of my favorite practices as a school leader was standing outside in the morning with my cup of coffee, greeting families as they dropped off their children. You'd be surprised how that consistent presence develops a sense of trust for families and a sense of comfort with them as well. When they see that bright smile that you try to flash every morning and give them a wave to let them know their child's going to be okay with you for the next several hours. Another way to do it is just by making those proactive phone calls and saying, "Hi, I'm your child's principal. Just wanted to say hello." And so those two things have been part of my practice that have enabled me to be proactive in developing really strong, authentic relationships with families.
What role should schools play in community empowerment?
One of the things that schools do that drives me a little bit crazy is that we think about our students as our customers. We think about our families as our customers. That's not what they are. We're not a business. The students are our product.
Mhm.
Whatever we do for them is what they will carry out into their community. So, a large part of educating our young people should be based on a sense of action research. What does the community need its young people to do? And not just teaching them in abstract ways. So when you become really engaged in the community as a leader and you have a sense as to what the vibe of the community is and what they need their young people to grow up to aspire to be, you can and should bring that into your educational setting and make sure that their students' experience is tailored to meet the needs of the community in which they live. There's no value in teaching students how to fish if you don't give them access to water.
Mm. So, how much better would that be if they took the politics out of that?
I would Politics have unfortunately played too prominent a role in my personal career and in just decision making in schools in general. However, we understand that politics are part of anything that people are going to be part of. I think what has to happen, though, is that you can reduce excessive politics by asking one question: how is this decision putting us closer to achieving our mission? Too few school leaders that I've worked with actually use the mission as an authentic barometer of success. Too few school leaders actually develop authentic and real visions that can be pursued and actually serve as a motivator to encourage others to grow. So I would say that when you're authentically mission driven, politics will automatically take a back seat because you're going to understand that not everyone has the same way about going about doing the work. I have some unorthodox methods. My training is different than most school leaders. There's not many people who were Chinese majors as undergrads who go on to lead schools. My view of the world is different, and I go about doing things differently. And sometimes that bothers folks. But instead of them focusing on the results for children, they focused more about the personality and how I went about the work. And so I've learned that politics, unfortunately, can be a detriment to the work, but by keeping the work focused on the mission, you can reduce the role of politics.
How do you approach outreach in communities that feel unheard or underserved?
Knocking on doors. And one of the things that I always have done as a school principal is wore my ID and walked through the neighborhood and said hello to anybody who would say hello to me. I
Mhm.
have developed some really strong relationships with members of our school communities just by walking through the community and saying hello to anyone who would be willing to say hello. And when people see that you're not going to hide behind the four walls of the school, but you are actually there to be a member of the community. And I want to strike this point. When you don't live in the community, this becomes even more important to do. I never wanted to be perceived as a person who's collecting a check.
Mhm.
I always want to be perceived as a stakeholder in the communities in which I served. And you do that by being a member of the community. You find out where the local restaurant is that everyone goes to, and you go there and you have lunch.
Right.
You go to the bodega or the poppy store and you get your coffee there and you interact with folks. And that is a great way to help bring the school to the community. And you'll find that will bring the community to the school, because sometimes people would ask me, "Why are you dressed in a suit?" Oh, I'm the principal at the school next door. You didn't know? No. Well, you should come over and find out some of the great things that we're doing. So just by being out and about, you can develop some really strong relationships and raise the profile of your school.
Mhm. Um, what is one community initiative you are most proud of?
Hmm. A community initiative I think that I'm most proud of was the redesign that we did in White Plains, New York.
Mhm.
Having that long history of the Office of Civil Rights being involved in that community was something I was proud to help play a role in breaking. And so part of the way in which we did that was through that redesign process, which was a very strategic process where we went out into the field and we listened to the school community. What are some of the things that work well for your children in school? And what are some of the things that you'd like to see done differently? I mean, that restructuring of the school, I mean, we took a school with a long legacy and changed it into something that doesn't really exist in many places, which was a single grade building. The result of that work was we created a sixth grade academy. And it was designed around the dissertation that I wrote, the Keystone Grade. And
Mhm.
what we learned is that through explicit modeling for children, that even if they struggle in the first half of their academic career, they can springboard in sixth grade to have success in the second half of their career. So White Plains Middle School was designed to teach young people what it actually means to be a learner at the secondary level and how to be a good student and classmate with each other as well. And so there was a lot of foundational skills that were part of that sixth grade experience and that school that we created, which led those students to then have success in seventh grade and beyond. I'm very proud because even though we accomplished that final design 13 years ago, the
Mhm.
school continues to flourish and they have not changed very much of that model across these 13 years.
Oh, wow. See, that's what I call impact.
Yes.
Because I think anytime that you can actually, especially if it's in a bad way, and you guys are able to turn that around and turn into a positive, which is the one part that when I got through and when I was reading your bio, and that was the one thing that caught my eye the most. And that is the schools that you turned around, but also the number of people that were involved.
Yes.
That in itself, that says a whole lot, not just about the work that you do, but the leadership and the character that you present. Because not many people can actually sit there and say that they did that kind of work that you do, and can actually say, this is the heart and soul of this work.
Yes.
Because as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people that's in education, they like to say, well, I got my paycheck.
Right.
So I mean, they don't care about the quality, but you're displaying the quality, which is a rarity because there's not many educators or people in that field that actually get down to the very bottom, like a fraction, to that lowest term, and it has meaning.
Yes.
And so I'm very I'm sure that everybody that's watching this show has got to be very happy about that. But I gotta say that I'm more than honored to have a person of your stature here to talk about education because it's very, very important for our people, especially in these days and times right now, because it's become a real circus.
It absolutely has, Charles. And I just want to say this: if everyone would just read a book, our country would be in a lot better situation than we are currently. It just being educated is something that we should all be proud of. we should all look at school as the central provider of education and say, there's something in this that I can get that would be of benefit to me.
Right.
And as a person who can help deliver that to young people, why would you not want to? And,
Wow.
one of the things I would say is that I'll take some of my colleagues off the hook. I don't think that people just collect their check. I don't know that everyone knows how to get down to that next level. And,
Wow.
I have found that there are people who have really good hearts, but don't necessarily have the experiences or the skills, which is part of the reason why I do the work that I do now. I
Mhm.
love sharing with folks these outside the box approaches and sometimes these overly simplistic ways that you can have a true impact in a school setting.
Mhm.
And because education hasn't changed the way it goes about educating children very much over the last 100 years, a lot of folks don't know how to bring innovation and creativity into the work. Their heart might be in the right place, but their skills or their perspective does not allow them to have the impact that I've been blessed to have in school settings.
I don't want to again make sure that I'm not coming across as being rude, but can you tell us, like, in a process like that, because what you're saying is so true. Like, in this whole thing, because some people kind of like just get there.
Right.
Okay, I'm talking about some of the educators; they just get there when they don't actually have those bare bone minimums that can go deeper, as you mentioned. Why aren't they just relieved?
They're not
What?
relieved for a couple of reasons. One, nobody wants to do that job. you know, I've worked with some great teachers across the years. I mean, some phenomenal teachers who have outstanding leadership skills, who have shirked the responsibility of becoming formal school leaders because they see just how demanding the work is and how hard it is. What they don't see are the rewards that come with it. They see the hard parts. And so some of the very best teachers don't become school leaders. And what that means, Charles, is that sometimes you have people who aspire towards leadership, but maybe don't have the background or skill set that should position them to be leaders. And so I feel very strongly about this. There's two ways to become a great principal: have been a great teacher or have been a great school counselor or social worker.
Mm,
If you are great in your field of in the people personnel side, being a counselor or social worker, you will be a great leader because you understand people, you understand systems, you understand success.
mhm,
And as a school leader, all I've ever tried to do was replicate the environments that I created in my classroom, just on
mhm,
a much larger scale.
mhm,
And sometimes when people go into leadership, they are motivated by the bigger paycheck, the authority, and sometimes the freedom that comes with being a leader. When you're a classroom teacher, you can't go to bathroom whenever you want. But when you're a school principal, you can. And that flexibility appeals to some people and not necessarily the moral purpose behind the work. And morals have always driven how I've gone about doing the leadership work. And not everyone has considered what role morals and values should play in their leadership.
mhm. So, how do you ensure the community voices shape policy and practice?
You start by actually listening to the voices and then reflecting what you hear and the information in which you advocate. I have often changed my mind after getting new information from people in the community, either because what I was asking or what I thought needed to be done wasn't relevant, or because it couldn't be done, or because someone had a better idea. And so when you actually go out into the community and you talk with folks and you find out what their perspectives are, the next step is to amplify those voices, not diminish them. Too often, I want to say this carefully, but truthfully, oftentimes we go into communities with people that look like me, and
Mhm,
people who look like me undervalue those parents because we don't perceive them as being appropriately educated.
mm,
They don't use they sometimes don't use standard English, or they have broken English, and we feel like their contributions don't matter as much. Basic respect should make us want to hear what a person has to say, especially when they're sending their most valuable commodity to us on a daily basis. Parents don't keep their best children at home and send us the ones that they want to go to school. They send us who they have.
right.
And whether they love them the way that we think they should or shouldn't doesn't really matter. They sent them. And because of that, we owe them a certain amount of respect to hear what they say and ensure that our decision making reflects their wants and needs as well.
Mm. You know, with that, I have to say, no names, whatever have you, but as you say that, I've actually heard that an enormous amount of times. And, I guess because I'm not in education, I'm not going to say that I know what that means, but I do know the part outside of that that I don't think is nice at all.
Right.
But I have actually heard that kind of talk. Let's talk a little bit about your higher education and professorship.
Yes.
Can you tell us what motivated you to teach at the higher education level?
I love teaching, Charles. I mean, I would teach a wall if I thought the wall would benefit from my instruction. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy the process of finding where people are and helping just to move them closer to a shared purpose and a shared goal. I first had the opportunity to be a professor before I even finished my master's degree. And when that opportunity was presented to me, I was like, I get to work with adults and help them learn. Great. Part of it was I wanted to help the adults learn, but I also wanted to challenge myself to see if I could adapt to moving from teaching middle schoolers to teaching people who were the same age or even in many cases older than I was at the time. Teaching adults requires a very different skill set than it does to teach children. And because I like to challenge myself, I really saw it as an opportunity to broaden my skill set and just get better at being an educator overall.
What do you believe future educators need that they aren't often getting?
The truth. Teaching isn't what most people think it is. Oftentimes people think that teaching is going into a classroom and pouring into empty vessels. And for some people, they do that. They go into classrooms and they tell children everything that they want them to know and not necessarily what they need. Teaching is a complex interaction between adults and children that really hinges on an adult's ability to be flexible, responsive, and practical in the solutions that they seek to provide to young people. Teaching is not writing lesson plans, grading papers, and delivering instruction. It's about how do you deliver instruction to 25 children when two of the other children in the class may have been impacted by a traumatic event on their way to school that day. Teaching is about how do you take people who may have missed instruction for a period of time, but help them catch up, despite the fact that it may be challenging for you to provide them with that learning experience that they missed because of attendance issues. Teaching is about motivating people to become more than what they ever thought they could be. And you don't do that by just simply grading papers and grading tests. The most important feedback you give is very rarely in the form of a number score or a letter grade. The most important feedback you often give to young people is when you get on their level, when you kneel down at their desk, look them in the eye and find a way to inspire them to be even more than they are at that moment. Teaching is hard, and it requires an understanding that it's going to present lots of challenges.
So, how do you prepare aspiring leaders for the realities of the field?
The first thing I get the leaders to understand is that success does not come early in leadership. To be an effective leader, you often have to come in and do very little initially because all change is difficult in organizations. And when you come into a leadership role, you represent both physically and spiritually a change in that organization. Going into it, you may be enthusiastic and eager to bring about all these things that you wanted to do when you got in the role, but your first responsibility is to find out what are the authentic needs of the community I'm leading.
Mm.
And so that can take time. And so even though you may have a binder full of great ideas and you may have done something in another environment that worked, first and foremost, your job as a leader is to go in and find out what are the needs of those people I serve, what are the strengths of those folks I serve, and how does what I bring going to help bring those things to fruition.
So, let's talk a little bit about your consulting work. Can you tell us what inspired you to expand your work into consulting?
What inspired me was seeing that there's a real gap in providing leaders with what they need in traditional school settings in the existing staff.
Mhm.
When I was a principal in the school district of Philadelphia, um, while I had a wonderful supervisor, I did not have a coach. Even though I had experience, having someone to bounce ideas off of and perspective to gain is a critical part of being a successful leader. If you want to guarantee failure as a leadership, make decisions in isolation. You won't succeed. But if you have someone that you can bounce ideas off and talk through situations, it puts you in a position where you are much more likely to be successful. I find that in my consulting work, each and every day, I get to work with people who are stuck with a different problem or a situation and they're seeking to get better. And because they're seeking to get better, they're open and receptive to doing the work differently and to receiving different ideas. It brings me great joy when I go to New York, or whether I'm in Pennsylvania, or whether I'm working in Maryland, and I'm working with leaders who are stuck, and then through a 40-minute conversation are no longer stuck in the way that they were prior to that. The other thing I like about that consulting allows me to do is introduce some of that creativity in many more school districts than just working in one. That has helped establish me as a difference maker in this field. And creativity is often an underemphasized aspect of leadership. But because I've been able to be successful bringing creativity into the work, going into schools and supporting leaders with how they can bring their creativity into the work to make a difference, also brings me joy in this role.
So, what are the most common challenges districts bring to you?
The most common challenge that districts bring often centers around interpersonal conflict.
Mhm.
Districts are made up of lots of competing priorities. They're made up oftentimes of unions and different bargaining groups, and sometimes they have different priorities. And where I should say their priorities can present differently. So interpersonal challenges is the first and most prevalent concern that leaders bring to me. How do they convey important information in ways in which it will be received? How can they work through a conflict with, sometimes it could be their secretary that they have a conflict with, it could be another administrator in another building. It could be those that they're seeking to lead. But interpersonal conflict is by far the most common issue that I'm asked to help with.
How do you help leaders move from intention to measurable action?
The first thing we do when we talk about intention is that intention tied to an actual vision. One of the things that I get an opportunity to do, Charles, when I consult, and I don't work with school districts that don't have living, breathing missions, visions, and values. If you don't have a breathing mission, vision, and value statement, I can help develop one for you, but I won't work with a school district that does not believe itself to be mission driven. Having
Mhm.
a very clear mission and a vision that supports that is how you take positive intention and turn it into action. The pathway to hell is made of good intentions.
Yes.
And there are lots of school leaders that I've seen have good intentions that were misaligned with what the authentic needs of their school community are. So you go from having good intentions to actual positive outcomes by A, articulating your vision, B, ensuring that vision is supportive of the mission that is the school district has in place, and C, aligning your resources to ensure that that vision can come to life. Too often, leaders are not patient enough to actually clearly articulate their vision. And I'll share this story with you. When in one of the schools in which I was a principal, our vision statement was, in pursuit of a national blue ribbon, it is our responsibility to promote the social, emotional, and academic growth of our students. Now, I can remember that a decade later because it was real. And while we did meet the criteria for the blue ribbon, unfortunately, we didn't earn it. But the teachers would call me Dr. Blue Ribbon behind my back, and I loved it because I knew that they knew what it was we were trying to accomplish. And so anytime I laid out a plan and asked folks to consider doing something differently, they're like, oh, here comes Jonathan. He must want to earn that blue ribbon again. And so they understood why the actions were being outlined for them the way they were, because they understood what the intent was. And they saw that it was producing wins for us along the way.
So, what is the biggest barrier to sustainable school improvements?
Well being.
Mm,
Oftentimes, and I'm going to speak from my own personal experience here, many times the success that I've experienced in schools was just sheer willpower. It wasn't because we had the resources, it wasn't because we had the best plan, but it was because myself and others were willing to just work ourselves into states where maybe we weren't as healthy as we should have been. And as a result, sustaining that over long periods of time can be extraordinarily difficult. Part of what I coach folks on, as I mentioned before, the WIRE framework, is that wellness, intentionality, respect, and empowerment are keys to succeeding long term. And if you don't put the wellness of the organization on your plate, if you don't put your personal wellness on your plate and prioritize those things, you may experience success, but it will be short lived.
how do you tailor your consulting approach to different communities?
So I start by finding out who the communities are and what it is that they actually need. And what I tell the folks that I work with is that the service that they're receiving from my team is customized to their specific needs. And while there are canned programs that we provide at Catalyst Education, all of our programs are not to be used in every school district. And so when school districts reach out or we reach out to them, we really want to ascertain clearly what is it that you're seeking to accomplish and how can we build a program that will help you achieve that goal. So we've worked with school districts as large as the New York City Department of Education and their equity office to other school districts that were tiny, but making sure that we listen to what their needs are and that we design something from scratch to support them has been a key component to that. And taking our existing offerings and adapting them as well is another way we go about meeting those needs.
So, what is the most rewarding part of teaching graduate students?
When they complete their programs, adults bring so much into the educational setting that makes it difficult for them to successfully complete. When you're a young person, you have to go to school, so you have to be there. When you're an adult, despite the fact that you're paying money, life can life and get in the way of you completing your tasks. And so, as a graduate school instructor, I often have students where they're taking care of an ill parent, they're raising their children, they have complex jobs that get in the way of them completing their work. And so, designing instruction and providing supports that allow them to navigate life while completing complex work in an advanced degree brings me great joy when they complete the program.
So, how do you integrate real world leadership challenges into your coursework?
Through the conversations that I have with those I teach. So much of my teaching style is not just about putting information on a board or asking people to read things, but by engaging folks in dialogue about what their experiences are, their understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish, and what might be some obstacles that get in the way. And so by really getting on the ground level and finding out what the needs are, the perspectives are, I have found that's great success there.
What trends in education concerns you the most?
Grading. The fact that we're still giving letter grades and number grades to students is beyond confusing to me. Grades don't tell us a whole lot about what students know or are able to do. Yet, so many of us think that when a child comes home with an A, it means that they were successful in school. An A means that you were successful in completing the work. It doesn't tell us about the quality of the work that you completed. And 82 is oftentimes a percentage, and that percentage is not based off of any statistically relevant formula. Sometimes a teacher creates just a 13 question test because that was all the questions they could come up with. So why is an 82 on that test a B, whereas a 100 question test, you might have a different result? I think it's high time for educators to honestly and seriously consider the fact that grading is authentically harmful to the goals that we purport to pursue.
What do you hope your students remember about you 20 years from now?
But I love them. Every student got the very best from me, and I educated every child as if I was them.
Mhm.
I sought to give every student whatever it was I thought they needed to be successful. I'm certain I failed in that area for some students. I'm certain of it, just because I'm not flawless. And research says that you're not going to meet everyone despite your best efforts. But I want every student to know that I authentically loved them and gave them my very best every day.
So this brings me to this part. When we chatted, I told you we do Black History 365.
Yes.
And I asked you who were the most influential persons in your life and career. And you told me that was Deborah Annan Wolf Partridge, or was that Partridge Wolf? I hope I didn't get the name confused. And Judith Johnson. Can
Yes.
you tell us why are they so influential in your life?
I'm going to start talking about Deborah Wolf, who is the former Grand Basilisk of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, who has she served 5 different presidents in advising them on educational policy. She is a Black woman who has a high school in Alabama named after her, a dormitory at Trenton at the College of New Jersey, and that Jersey City State University, the School of Education, is named after her. She worked for the United Nations, and she did everything within her power to ensure that anyone who came in contact with her left better than when they met her. She always talked about the power of education, and I referred to her as my Aunt Debbie. She was the associate pastor at my father's church.
Mhm.
And every time I saw her, it was education, 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 education. And that really stuck with me about the importance of formal education and how it could change your life. This was a woman who was a Tuskegee Airman at a time where women had very few rights, but because she didn't let anything stop her, that allowed her to persevere. And Judith Johnson, who was a former regent in the state of New York and my mentor and a superintendent, embodied many of those same characteristics. She advised Bill Clinton as a deputy secretary of education for elementary education. And she was a superintendent that transformed two different school districts. But the thing that they both had in common was the unwavering belief that a high quality education is what would truly change the world.
What lessons from their leadership continue to guide your work?
That this work is not easy. Oftentimes, we go into leadership and we want to just do the work and achieve the outcomes that we aspire towards. What I learned from both Ms. Johnson and Dr. Wolf was that to achieve great things, you will go through great obstacles. That every time you're on the verge of accomplishing something great, every and any force that can stop you will present itself. And that's when you have to deepen your resolve. So what I've learned from both of them is that whenever it begins to get hard, that means you're usually on to something really good that's going to make a significant difference in the lives of the children that you serve.
Well, and so, how do you honor their legacy through your own services?
I try to honor their legacy by embodying the spirit of excellence that they demonstrated consistently. I am not perfect. I'm a deeply flawed person. I make mistakes. There are areas in which I'm still seeking to grow. But whenever I put on my suit and tie and I leave the house every day to go do that my job, I try to make sure that whomever I'm interacting with is getting the very best, not just that I can offer, but that is available. And that has encouraged me to stay on top of my professional training, to have as much information as I can possibly have, and the most cutting edge skills and strategies to provide others as well. So just making sure that I'm putting forth my best effort every day is what I carry from those two.
Well, I want to tell you that you have made this season 4 premiere about as premierable as possible. I want to thank you for being here because this is truly, truly awesome. What are some words of wisdom and encouragement that you have for our audience in closing? And also how they can connect with you via your website, that is your social media, any of those things that you'd like for them to know.
So thank you for that. And if you want to get a hold of me, the website you can best get a hold of me is catalyst-edu.com or jabrownleadership.com. So those are the two websites you can find me at. You can also find me at LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. If you search Jonathan Brown, I pop up pretty early. Middle initial is A. So those are some ways that you can stay in touch with me. Charles, can you just remind me that as far as the words I'd like to leave with the audience today is that if you're doing anything of value for society, people will try to stop you from doing it. I would strongly encourage you to surround yourself with people who are positive, people who are going to encourage you, people who aren't going to let you drop the mantle when it gets heavy. When you are making a difference in the world, even people who are claiming to be of support to you can sometimes become obstacles in that process. So just surrounding yourself with positive people, people who will encourage you, motivate, and inspire you is what I recommend to everyone who's out there who's looking to make a difference in this world.
Well, I'll tell you this, Dr. Brown, we definitely got to have you back. And I just want to make sure that in closing that our audience realize that this show sets the stage for the rest of this entire season. And so I just want to close this by saying, what a way to open a season. But Dr. Brown, tonight you didn't just speak, you set a standard. You reminded us that leadership is not a title, but a responsibility. You showed us that when we invest in people, we elevate systems. When we honor our history, we strengthen our future. And when we lead with intention, we create possibilities that echo far beyond our lifetime. This is the synergy of that a season premiere deserves. This is the tone that sets the pace for everything to come. To our viewers, if tonight moved you, let it also motivate you. Let it push you to lead where you stand. Uplift who you can and believe fiercely in the brilliance of our children and our communities. Season 4 has officially begun, and if tonight is any indication, we're stepping into our most powerful season yet. I'm your host, Charles King. This is America in Black and White. and we are just getting started. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Brown. We'll see you next time, and the rest of you as we do America in Black and White, as we continue to color conversations on the canvas of America. You all have a great evening.